one.
Oh, I love that theme song. I always have. Please indulge and forgive me my movie meeps. I know that premiering Real Talk, then taking maternity leave for almost a year was a cruel, cliffhanging device. But although it wasn't my intent, I hope the expanse between then and now has had you salivating for more of this innovative and informative review show. Welcome to my second episode of Real Talk. I am your host, this intellectual Kate Taylor, and this is HTLA Radio 1 New York. If you love film, if you live film, then this is the film show for you. Keep in mind that aside from our special episodes, the films I analyze are not currently in theaters. I go beyond spoilers in this show, and I break down the structure and story of the films I compare for my biggest buffs out there. So if you've not yet seen either of the films I'm discussing tonight, remember that they're all available on Netflix. Go watch them, then come back and tear them up here with me. This is a film analysis show. The show's for those with an interest in not just seeing film, but being part of the history of enjoying them, and if you're lucky enough, like me, making them. I am a storyteller, I'm a screenwriter, married to a director, and we tell stories. Thus, I dissect and analyze the stories others tell, so I can be constantly discovering and learning and finding better ways to tell my stories to you. If you more than watch film, if you, like me, become the film you're watching for that 90 or so minutes, then again, welcome to Real Talk. Now, before we get into tonight's show proper, I've got to take care of those generous and brilliant folks that keep me on the air for you. Tonight's episode of Real Talk is brought to you by Netflix. Watch TV shows and movies anytime, anywhere, only $7.99 a month. Jaguar, building machines that roar. Oh, we should have had a roar special effect in there or something. And Calvin Klein's intoxicating fragrance, Euphoria. I got to get myself some of that. Sounds good. Sounds like something I'd really like. So please keep in mind that the opinions I'm about to express here in my show do not necessarily reflect those of HTLA Radio 1 or our sponsors and advertisers, God forbid. Lastly, for all of my past, current, and future episode information, as well as forums in which to discuss what you think about my celluloid dissection, register a free profile on www.htla973.com and do some real talking of your own. Once again, if you've missed it, this show contains uber spoilers of the films that I discuss. So if you don't want to have your film spoiled, go see them first, untainted by my analyses, and come back and listen to this episode on the HTLA website after. Okay, so on with the show. So the first of my film choices for tonight's show is Seven, the 1995 critical hit, both critically acclaimed by the people in the know and the reviewers as well as audiences. It was really, really well received. Written by Andrew Kevin Walker, directed by David Fincher, and starring Brad Pitt, Morgan Freeman, Kevin Spacey, and Gwyneth Paltrow. From a straight edge thriller to a psychological drama to the topic of tonight's show, religion as a plot device, this is one of those rare contemporary films that should be studied in film schools for disciplines ranging from screenwriting to directing to acting to editing. The whole shebang, in my opinion, is top notch, not a step missed or a beat skipped. Really one of my favorite all-time films, and it's up there in my top three, actually, just for the pacing and the way it's been executed. The second choice for comparison is a film that's written by David Callahan and directed by Scandinavian filmmaker Jonas Åkerlund. So let me tell you, don't ever be afraid to watch anything crime or thriller from anywhere in Europe. Their pacing is more often than not sublimely brilliant. It's, how can I describe it? It's understated, but you get way more tense than watching American films because American films are so formulaic. And with European films, there's absolutely no formula. It's whatever the filmmaker wants to do. So they just weave that plot, and the pacing is more tense but more unnoticeable. So after the film, you realize that you've just been on a roller coaster ride, and you don't even realize it during. Whereas with American films, it's so in your face, you know. So definitely check out some European thrillers because they're just unlike any. Yeah, this film was made in the U.S. in 2009, starring Denis Quaid, Ziyi Zhang, and Clifton Collins Jr., a hugely underrated talent in this industry, by the way. So watch anything this boy is in. He's got such a filmography, too, and most people don't even realize how long he's been in the game, but, definitely hope he gets his due recognition sometime in the future. He needs that one right role to just thrust him into the spotlight. But this film, as subtly but edge-of-your-seat paced as Seven, with just as brilliant a sociopathic mastermind, only this time it's with a twist that Ziyi Zhang is the too smart for her own good schoolgirl adopted by a well-off American family. It's definitely another one of those films where you don't see it coming until the end, so that's why I like it. I'm always fascinated when films show the dark side of religious fanaticism, and these two films definitely do that spot on. As we'll learn as I get further into my autopsy of these works, they use similar devices, structure, and pacing to build to a surprising crescendo, climax, and end. So let's start by comparing production values first, because sometimes that can overall affect the outcome of a film. First, Seven was intended as a theatrical release. Just check out the casting choices. It was put out in association with several other production companies. New Line Cinema plunked down a $33 million budget. Wait, forget this, a whopping $316 million return worldwide. Pretty good. So Lionsgate put up a $20 million budget for Horsemen, and although it was also intended for a theatrical release, it spent little time in theaters, and it went direct to DVD after a very short run on screens. I could only find non-U.S. figures, and they only came in at, wow, a $1.1 million return. That's really bad. And again, as for the U.S. numbers, I did an exhaustive search, but I came up completely empty. I think Lionsgate was embarrassed to post them. So there's only a slight difference in budget amounts for these two, but clearly, as I have a tingle on for both of these films in this instance, budget had no effect overall on production or the final product, as some of the other films I review and compare. So generally, my comparatives are quite divergent, but in the case of these two, the concluding underlying message is to show how religious fanaticism can lead to twisted ideologies and ultimately internally justified acts of a most horrific nature. I found it fascinating how both showed the instigators of the investigated crimes to inevitably blame the victims themselves, as in Seven, or the unintended acts of parental indifference, one post a family tragedy, as in Horsemen, for the culmination of carnage rather than religion itself or their own pathologies. So, in other words, both of these films have antagonists that are, for whatever reason, finding themselves using religion to justify, their hurts and their wounds, and they're also using it as a device to sort of, I guess they're both revenge films in a way, although I don't think it was intended by the writers to seem so. But now that I'm actually thinking more about it, both Ziyi Zhang's character is jealous of the natural-born children of the adopted family she's been adopted into, and poor her, So it's a religious family. It's a straight-laced family. So she uses that Western religion, however, to justify all this stuff, and latches on to the apocalypse theory in the Bible and decides that her and her entourage are going to be the ones to instigate it, and they've been the chosen ones in their twisted, warped teenage minds to bring this to the world and start the apocalypse. So, but also now thinking of Kevin Spacey's character in Seven, it's pretty much the same thing. They never went into his psychological background in the film, but I'd be curious to know what his upbringing was. We have an overall subtle inkling that he's wealthy, independently wealthy. He doesn't work. He's got money in the bank. His rent is paid cash. His utilities are paid cash. So it leads us to believe that this is just some, spoiled, maybe trust fund baby that just went wacko and is using religious fanaticism to justify his serial murder. And but ultimately, he's got this overall plan and this sense of creating this masterpiece for the world to see. So he's also driven by the need for recognition and egotistic motives that Ziyi Zhang's character doesn't have. But she actually manipulates the other horsemen. She's just like the ringleader in the whole thing. And yeah, so it's very interesting. If you watch both these films, I'd love to know what your take on their psychological profile is. I always think that in murder films and serial killer films and things like that the writers really should get more into the psychological backgrounds of the characters. I understand that for pacing purposes and editing and all that stuff that you can't show every scene you'd like to show. But these are critical and they're crucial to, I think, the audience's understanding the motivations. And for somebody like me who approaches film really, really obviously intellectually, I want to know. I want to know what their upbringing was like. I want to know what caused them to become these, serial killers and twisted members of society. Religion itself is supposed to be something supportive and loving and good and benevolent and growth promoting. How does it get so twisted and so utilized by so many as a device for the most atrocious things that have ever been heard of? So, but as far as production values for both of these films, like I said, they were both intended for theatrical release. They're both really well shot. They have great casts, and I don't think that made any difference one way or another. I will say about Seven, the one thing I didn't like about Seven was the overall darkness of the shooting. To me, it kind of took away from the psychological instead of enhancing it. Like yeah, we get it. It's an inner city. It's grungy. It's gross. But did their apartment really need to look like? It looked to me more like a set you'd see on a Broadway play. They had done, the peeling wallpaper and, the kind of rotting wood, and, they had. It must have been canned sounds of, the bottles breaking and the cats meowing. It was just a little over the top in its set design and, its overall feel. I don't think it won any awards for set design or anything like that. But the same thing, I mean, with all the crime scenes, even Kevin Spacey's apartment. Now, he's independently wealthy. Obviously, they state it, that he pays his rent in cash. All his utilities are paid in cash. But he, again, lives in this, grungy, rundown, flea-bitten apartment, and I just didn't get who chose that overall theme for that film, because it would have been, I think, they also say it's a Midwestern city, some nondescript Midwestern city. So, and I've never been to the Midwest, for any length of time except in various airports here and there. So I don't know what their inner cities are really like. But I am from New York City, and I can tell you that most of the city does not look like that. So I think it would have been a more believable film had they, gone at least the middle class route with the people that were victims and that lived there. Even one of the victims who was an attorney. They go from the grungy, flea-bitten, wallpaper peeling, cat meowing sets to looks like she lives in Donald Trump's penthouse. And I don't know about you, but attorneys don't make that money. Not even the high profile, ones that you see all the time, like Cochran and, what's her name from Court TV? Oh, her name is right on the tip of my tongue, and I hate that. But I know her daughter, Lisa Bloom, actually. But anyway, so it just was too much of a diversion between, both of those places in that set design whole thing. So I didn't like that about Seven. Where Horsemen was also set in the Midwest. And it was way more accurate. They had the houses, and there was a lot of fields, and it was bright in the day and dark at night like it's supposed to be. And they had several scenes in the inner city, and again, well lit by the street lights, and it was just a better shot film. I think they went for way too much atmosphere in 7, and it just, to me, it diminished. It diminished the quality of the writing, and it would have been better had somebody taken a little more care to not make it so atmospheric and so moody, because it was just unnecessary, I think. But that's just my opinion. But that's what you're here for anyway, so yeah, so pay attention. So anyway, yeah, as far as production value, I don't think there was much difference between the two. But I think I am going to take my first commercial break now. And when we get back, we're going to get more into the meat of these two films. So stick around. We'll be back in 2, Filministas.
When you have cable and can't record all your shows, you feel unhappy. When you feel unhappy, you go to happy hour. When you go to happy hour, you're up for anything. When you're up for anything, you head to a Turkish bathhouse. When you head to a Turkish bathhouse, you meet Charlie Sheen. And when you meet Charlie Sheen, you reenact scenes from Platoon with Charlie Sheen. Don't reenact scenes from Platoon with Charlie Sheen. Get rid of cable and upgrade to DirecTV. Call 1-800-DirecTV.
There are machines that can do things for us. Machines that can make things for us. Machines that can see right through us, and machines that want to be us, want to replace us, but they are not us. There is one machine that makes us greater, a machine so instinctive, so seductive, it's as alive as we are. It doesn't click or buzz. It roars. Jaguar.
I always said shoes are like women. They inspire beautiful music.
But what about these?
Stilettos sound like this.
What does my fragrance inspire?
That's got soul.
Mai Tais are beautiful. They don't need music.
Bringing the stars together. That's the magic of Macy's.
HTLA Radio 1.
Okay, we're back, and you're listening to Real Talk with Kate Taylor on HTLA Radio 1, New York. And tonight we're disseminating the differences between the religion-themed crime thriller 7. See, I was doing so well before then. All those big words in my opening. Starring Brad Pitt and Morgan Freeman, and Horsemen, starring Denis Quaid and Ziyi Zhang. See, that's even a tough name to say, Ziyi Zhang. It's cool, though. I like the Z's. So we're going to get into more of the plot points and the devices they use in both of these films, and the variations that they've done on the stories, what genres, etc. So let's start with the synopsis of 7. Okay, Detective Mills, played by Brad Pitt, quickly learns that moving his wife to the mean streets of an undisclosed Midwest inner city to pursue his ambitions as a homicide detective may not have been the greatest idea. He's teamed up with a few days from retirement Detective Somerset, played by Morgan Freeman. They quickly catch an obvious serial homicide investigation in which the killer is justifying his atrocities via the doing of God's good work and the methodology of the 7 deadly sins in, of course, the most torturous ways. Now, as for Horsemen, we've got Detective Aidan Breslin, played by Denis Quaid, investigating a few torture slayings of his own in his neck of the woods. I believe also in a Midwestern state. They just don't elaborate. I think it's more northern, though, like I would say Illinois or maybe even Minnesota or Wisconsin or something like that. But what initially seems unrelated comes together with the confession of the teenage adoptee of his latest mutilated victim, an astonishingly 17-year-old looking Ziyi Zhang. As he's consoling her for the horrifying death of her adoptive mother, she apologizes and hands him a trash bag. This scene blew me away. Inside is the dead fetus she cut from the woman herself. So, hence that was her way of confessing. This kicks off a spiral of death and subplots as we delve into the stories and motivations of the 3 other perpetrators of this spree of killings. 4 perpetrators, with each a set of series of tasks representing the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, which they delusionally believe they are. So with ZE in custody, she slowly reveals throughout the film clues that Breslin follows to unravel the mystery. And it's a mystery that'll lead him much too close to home. So, to me, this is a wonderful setup for the character arc development that both of these main characters go through over the course of the film. So, for Mills, he's got to learn that good doesn't always, and we're going back to 7 first. So, for Mills, he's got to learn that good does not always win over evil, and that when you stare into the abyss stares back into you. For Somerset, his impending retirement and sinking into the knowledge that all the years of good, honorable service, wading through the slime and muck of the dregs of society, has made not a bit of difference. So throughout the film, as Freeman comes to realize the worst of humanity will remain and respawn, he tries to impart those hard-won lessons to a naive Brad Pitt, almost begging him to go back to the innocence of the farmland he plucked his snow-driven pure wife from. But sadly, Detective Mills is as hard-headed as a young, eager Detective Somerset was so many years ago. So we get to witness the brilliance of this arc of realization, though, physically, on Somerset's face, and within every nuance of his portrayal as the investigation deepens and the level of warped sensibility of this perpetrator is slowly revealed. So in Horsemen, Detective Breslin's arc isn't quite as obvious, nor is it as rapid. He lost his devoted wife to cancer, off-camera pre-plot, and he has a young son and a teenage son. He's completely distanced himself from them since the wife's death, as apparently the children were present at her deathbed at home, while Breslin worked a case, and he never forgave himself for that. So, as the climax and reveal to the film approaches, and as we watch the backstories of the other 3 perpetrators be revealed within their own vignettes, Breslin remains completely oblivious to the issues his inadvertent neglect is creating within his own family. So similarly, however, and the reason I feel these 2 films are the pinnacle of this particular plot device, Religion as a Crime Initiative, is that both Breslin and Mills become cognizant of the culmination of their arcs too late. So, and isn't that always the way of it in life, right? We always realize in hindsight. So, subplots. As for the subplots in 7, we see a bit with the dynamics between Somerset and Mills as Somerset enjoys his arc. There's also an interesting bit in a diner as Gwyneth reveals that she's pregnant and hates their move to the city, and she plays Brad Pitt's wife in the film, the aforementioned Piers the Driven Snow wife. So this really goes to reveal more of Somerset's core motivation. He chose his work in this awful city over his life's love's pregnancy. You know, he was with someone, they weren't married, but she got pregnant, and he asked her to abort it, and in doing so, killed their relationship in the process. But now, in hindsight, and in advising Gwyneth in the diner, he advises the opposite. He advises that they just take that kid and, you know, go and raise it and give it all the love that they can, because this is no place for anybody to be, let alone a family. So, and how, you know, if he could get Mills to choose family over this gritty work that just ultimately kills you for no use because you can't make a dent in this horrible society. So those are the ultimate lessons he's trying to impart in his years on the force. But this also reveals, though, how, like Somerset was back then, oblivious Brad Pitt is to his wife's plight. He's so consumed by his idealistic ambitions that he doesn't even entertain the thought of moving back. She's a school teacher. She can't even find a decent school to teach in because the conditions are so horrible. And again, though, I have to say, with 7, it's all way over the top. Yeah, we know the inner city's bad, and there are definitely certain segments of each city that are really bad. But it's just an uber over-the-top portrayal of nothing but darkness, and, you know, it's just a little bit too much, a little redundant. So, but with Horsemen, we do see several, 5 as a matter of fact, though 3 are more developed than the others, with our protagonists, Quaid, and each of the self-proclaimed horsemen, the perpetrators of this killing spree. So we see how each of these teenage killers are victims of the unintentional neglect and apathy of busy and or self-involved parents. And that while they seem to have model middle-class to upper-middle-class lives, their turning to religious fanaticism and ultimately serial murder is a desperate attempt to feel as though they belong somewhere and that someone is paying attention. You know, and it just dawned on me too, aside from the religion as plot device thing, there is an undercurrent to this film also about society in general and the teenagers in general today, because they are so much more on their own than they've ever been before. It's like we have them and we expect them to just go out and do their own thing and not be bothered with them once they hit a certain age. And Yeah, I wonder if the writer had intended, that kind of concurrent plot, to run with that, because I see that as well now. So, with Seven, we see the Brad Pitt character as the hero of the journey, with Morgan Freeman cast in the role as mentor, even if at first we think he's a co-hero. Freeman tries to get Pitt, like I say, to open his eyes to the utter futility of trying to make a difference or doing some good in what he's come to learn over the years on the force, that this is nothing but a cesspool swimming with nothing but the dregs of society, and whom are all utterly irredeemable in his eyes. There was a scene where he's throwing darts at a board, and he's just so completely alone in, yet again, another dark apartment, another run-down dark apartment. Although, ironically, his was more tidy and more neat and put together. So I think that was intended to show his more anal side, and it was just his way of dealing with all the filth. It was that he's got, such a nice, tidy, clean personal space. I could definitely see that there. Yeah. So in this, he shares his base ideology of the antagonist and villain Kevin Spacey, because Kevin Spacey obviously believes that, every one of his victims are completely irredeemable and throwaway and no good to anyone, including the lawyer. So it's not just, the lowlifes he's offing in the city. But in Horsemen, it's Denis Quaid who plods through his days, thrusting himself into his police work. But unlike Pitt, Quaid does it from a different motivation. He's throwing himself into his work under the pretense of doing good and solving cases and catching the bad guys. Obviously, he really doesn't care anymore. I mean, he's devastated by the loss of his wife. He's a shell of a man. He's deflecting the pain of his wife's death and his own mistakes and emotionally abandoning the children that she and now he is left behind. But while he doesn't do this with any malice, he genuinely feels the children are better off without their broken father. But it's a mechanism. So in this way, I liken his character to the naivety of Pitt's, who's trying to protect and save, where Quaid is just trying to prevent any further hurt and pain he feels he's already caused. Well, ultimately, and the irony is, it was that trying to prevent that caused all the other stuff. So I think the message in that point was, either you jump in and do what you got to do, or you're just going to make things worse. So, yeah. But the similarity in what makes both of these films really, really, though, got to say, well-written, cohesive, and worth seeing, is that they both realize how their tunnel-visioned actions, although done with the best of intentions, has instead led to the ultimate destruction of what they were trying to protect in the first place. And that's a really seriously heavy message for one film, let alone to have two films of the same genre with the same plot device and the same similar pacing and message to have come up with. So, and I don't think, I can't remember now the years, but no, they weren't released at the same time either. So it's unique to find that. Now, the subplot of Freeman having been beaten down by the worst of society's behaviors against itself, then in the end realizing, by witnessing the unraveling of Pitt's character through unconscious action in the name of good, that not everyone is a throwaway, and that sometimes the worst crimes are nothing but bad decisions, led up to by misguided idealism that's gotten somehow perverted along the way. Now, the subplots in Horsemen, each of the stories of the four killers, we all see how the victims have neglected to recognize the inherent value in their killer at some point, which leads them to being chosen as that particular killer's victim. For example, Z's victim was her adopted mother. She felt jealous of the other children, felt the mother actually treated her like an outsider, so that's what she felt like, and that's where she got her revenge from. Another was the older brother of the killer, that particular Horseman killer, who shunned him for being gay. Now we see an intense scene in the diner where they're trying to discuss it, and the older brother, who is the victim, and the gay boy, who is the killer and the apocalypse-bringing Horseman, tries to get him one last time to admit that he loves him despite he's being gay. And the brother is still keeping his cocky attitude. No, I don't want to hear it. Don't even talk to me about it, blah, blah, blah. So, by being unwilling to just in any way work with the brother or, admit that he still loves him despite being gay, whatever it is, his being completely devoid of compassion, led to his own death. So, if he had just sat down and had that conversation with his brother wouldn't have killed him. So, there's another lesson in there. This whole film is loaded with those. In each of these stories, there's all these little kind of, if you think back to like Greek mythology where, everything had a meaning in that way. Everything was a lesson. This film tries to do that as well. So, and it succeeds. So that's what makes it really good, I think. And if you're not aware of it, or you don't look at film with that kind of critical, intellectual, dissecting eye, you might not even realize it or notice it. But now that I'm telling you, look for it, because it's there. So, in their own ways, each is like the morality plays of old. Contemporized in its retelling in the modern crime thriller, with religion being the plot device the antagonists use to drive the stories. So, here we are. And again, we all know that anybody in the film making game knows that there's a particular structure and a way that films go. Besides the 3 acts, there's the character arcs that need to be concluded, and we writers like to say the hero's journey. It's very important. You have your specific characters in specific roles in their, either they're heroes or mentors, or the antagonists or the catalysts for the arcs for the other main characters. But both of these films succeed in the writing in that way of the characters, because everyone has their job, they do their job. And in some cases, in the case especially of 7 with Morgan Freeman, like we said, we weren't sure at first if he's either the mentor or the co-hero, because he's got his own arc. And the mentor doesn't usually have his own arc. He's just there to support the hero. But in this case, he's both. And ultimately, I like the way they wrap it up in the end, the character arcs, because Freeman realizes as well as Pitt. I guess we're led to assume that Pitt realizes, because, after the climax, we're not sure, because we don't really ever see Pitt again. But we're left to believe that subsequently he's going to realize that, A, he should have just gone back to the farmland, and B, he should have just listened to Freeman at the end in the climax when he was trying to get him not to do the thing that caused that destruction of his own inner character. So, let's see. I'm trying to think of something else interesting that I found about both of these that were similar. About the character arcs and the plot devices. Well, I could do a whole entire show on religion, and, how using it in film can either be negative or positive, and just like the characters in these films, it's going to be seen by the eyes of the person seeing it, their level of experience, their beliefs, all that stuff like that. So this is another reason why I chose this particular plot device to do here, because I find it so fascinating. It's endless. There's many, many facets. If you really want to get into it, you really could. Theologically and intellectually and all that stuff like that. So I wonder if they had explored more of, like I said earlier, the characters' backgrounds and what led them to here, if we would see a similarity. Because what fascinates me most is that life in art imitates life, and life imitates art. So what is done in these films obviously has been done in real life. We know there's been religious fanaticism in this world, and killers that have, used religion as their excuses and things like that. So, if the writers had molded the characters, after someone specific, or if there's a commonality, a thread of experiences that run through everything. And unfortunately, because these two films are written and made by two entirely different segments and camps, you can't know that. But it would be interesting to get both of these writers together in the same room and ask them the same questions. That would be very, very fascinating to me. Ultimately, all these, and I haven't even touched on the acting at all, which I'm going to do now, and it's not even in my next segment, so I'll do that now. But every single one of these roles, aside from being extremely well written, are well acted and well executed. And I'm not the hugest Denis Quaid fan. He's made some bad films in the past. I can't say Brad Pitt has made a bad film, and I can't say Morgan Freeman's made a bad film. And even Ziyi Zhang, even her native China films, where she's in a lot of the kung fu films, yeah, brilliant. So I'm not the hugest Denis Quaid fan, but in this film, you feel his pain and you see it on his face, and the things that he's going through can be conveyed without the use of dialogue, and that's important. And it's both of these films are extremely well acted and spot on. And aside from the atmosphere in 7, it would have been perfect. But yeah, absolutely. Touching on acting, though, Gwyneth Paltrow's character I wasn't impressed with. She did play the wife, and she delivered her lines, and she delivered it, with above average aptitude, as she's wont to do. But I don't know whether she just wasn't written better or the character was misinterpreted. But, as a wife, there was a lot lacking there. There was a lot left wanting and to be desired, and all this stuff. Why did she agree to this? Why did she? I mean, you just don't agree to up and move from your picturesque, perfect farmland to the most degenerate, degraded city on the planet. I don't care. Love is one thing, but, you just don't do that. And they did say that they were high school sweethearts, and that perhaps had something to do with it. And it was written as this was sort of Brad Pitt's dream, to be, and what I see is demoted from, an everyday town kind of police force to, usually people are sent where Brad Pitt's going as punishment. Oh, I even believe in one line in the beginning of the film, Freeman asks, you requested to be here because it's not a usual thing. So it leads me to wonder what Gwyneth's motivation was for agreeing to come with Pitt's character, and they never touch on that in the film. And again, if someone that's watching a film and dissecting it as they're watching it and rewriting stuff half the time, I want to know these things. These are things I want to know. So if you're a future filmmaker out there listening, keep these things in mind, because we want to know. The audiences want to know. Don't leave it out, because we're going to ask ourselves, and then we're going to ask you. And if you don't address it in the film, well, then we're going to say stuff like, well, that part sucked. And, because it does. So it kind of leaves out a whole thing. Again, with the Kevin Spacey character as well, brilliantly acted too, gotta say. Completely understated, completely. There was a scene in the police car after they catch him when they're going out to the supposed uncovering of the last victim, which of course was a complete fallacy. And Morgan Freeman starts asking him, do you really believe you're doing God's work? Or are you just using it as an excuse? Because that's what us all cynical people would say. He can't really believe that he's doing God's good work and that God's speaking to him and telling him to kill these people for him. And, it's very, his answers are very mysterious and, more enigmatic than one would think from a serial killer of the kind of crimes that he's committed. So, again, it leads me to believe, I would have loved to have had more of his background. He's highly educated. He's highly intelligent. He's put together, as we see in the end, this masterpiece that he claims to Freeman and Pitt on that ride there is going to, the world's going to be talking about it forever. And it's never going to be topped. And Brad Pitt's character tells him he's a movie of the week in a T-shirt. But you really do. You see that whole, at least I did, in Kevin Spacey's eyes when he's acting that scene and delivering that, like with such conviction that, oh yeah, the world's going to know what and you're going to help me too, and you don't even know it yet, that kind of thing. I can literally see the weaving of that plan behind his eyes, and that's just utterly brilliant. And it's things like that make a film the most the most memorable kind of films. So, but again, I have to say to the writer, like Gwyneth's character, I want to know what her motivation was for coming to this horrible place with her husband. I don't care how much you love somebody, you just don't do that, right? And I want to know what Kevin Spacey's background was. Was he, someone who comes from an immensely wealthy family, but he was neglected or abused? And how did his religious ideology get so twisted? And where did he come up with this stuff? And if he has enough money to live independently wealthy in the dregs of the city, why is he living in the dregs of the city? And, there's all these questions that hadn't been addressed really, but, what are you going to do? So it's time, though, now for my second commercial break. And when we come back, we're going to get to the best part of the show, which I love, and that's the climax and the ending. So stay tuned, and we'll be back in 2 minutes.
When your cable company keeps you on hold, you get angry. When you get angry, you go blow off steam. When you go blow off steam, accidents happen. When accidents happen, you get an eye patch. When you get an eye patch, people think you're tough. When people think you're tough, people want to see how tough. And when people want to see how tough, you wake up in a roadside ditch. Don't wake up in a roadside ditch. Get rid of cable and upgrade to DirecTV. Call 1-800-DirecTV.
No one just hands you the title, most advanced technology in its class. It needs to be earned. Earned with smart beam headlamps. Earned with vented temperature control seats. Earned with an 8.4-inch touchscreen. And if you're driving one, you know what it means to earn something.
Euphoria, Calvin Klein.
HTLA Radio 1.
Okay, we are back, and you're listening to Real Talk with Kate Taylor on HTLA Radio 1 New York, my favorite radio station in the world. And we're talking about religion as a plot device. And tonight we're dissecting the film Seven with Morgan Freeman and Brad Pitt, and a lesser-known film called Horsemen with Denis Quaid and Ziyi Zhang in the lead roles there. And both really well done, well executed, and a must-see in my book. And hopefully after listening to this show and, my comparison to the two, you will watch both and come to your own conclusions. So I love the agreement and I love the disagreement. So never be afraid to post to me and tell me what you think. So we're going to talk a little bit now about the climax of both of the films and then how the endings occurred, because as we all know, they're both different. They're not the same thing. In Seven, the climax comes when Kevin Spacey leads Mills and Somerset on an adventure out to the desert. Well, what I think is the desert. I think it's a Midwestern state. I don't know. Some field then. Some like wheat field or something. Oh, I think there was electric towers or something there. But anyway, promising to reveal the location of more victims' bodies. Now, instead, a box is delivered to the detectives on scene, which contains the head of Mills' wife. So, apparently, Kevin Spacey's gone to visit Gwyneth at home alone while Mills was out trying to catch the dregs of society against Morgan Freeman's advice. And he does horrible things to her and ultimately cuts off her head and has it delivered by courier service to this prearranged place where he's managed to get his attorney to have Mills and Somerset take him under the pretense of more victims. So Spacey goes on to then say, after Morgan Freeman opens the box, that his sin is envy. And he envied Mills' life with his wife and the love that they shared, etc., etc. And the normalcy, I would suppose. He's a whack job. But now Mills will then complete his masterpiece. That's going to be a social shock and awakening by becoming the remaining of his deadly sins, wrath. So, to me, I can still feel the chill that went up my spine when he said that. When that scene was delivered, it was one of the most brilliant scenes in film history, in my opinion, and I'll never ever forget it. And although Somerset tries desperately to talk Mills out of shooting Spacey in the head in anger, Mills' grief is too strong, and he does what Spacey prophesizes and kills him and becomes wrath. So, God, I still get chills when I think of that scene. Wow, it's crazy. So his killing of Spacey brings a hasty devolution into what it took years of grueling atrocities for Somerset to become. Just this shell of a broken, no faith in society, no faith in humanity person, right? You see so much and you become numb. So the climax of the film is delivered in short, fast bursts of well-paced shots, and it's definitely, like I said, one that stands out for me as an all-time favorite film. And anybody that wants to make film has to see this film and dissect it, because to me it's done. Every aspect of it is done really well, with the exception of those couple things that I mentioned. But in Horsemen, the climax comes when Quaid finally tracks down the last killer, the last of the four horsemen, and the supposed bringer of the apocalypse. And he finds out it's his own son. So it's his older teenage son. So as he sits dazed and dumbfounded, the son explains that he and his group had no choice but to go the way of this extreme irony, the most loved bringing death to those that love him, because the parents are numb and apathetic to the extreme. So they had to go to this extreme. And, I think Seven was a more, what's the word I would use? It's a film. Seven's more of a film where you really have to pay attention, because it's the intricacies are subtle, and until the end when he says those two things, and then you're like, oh wow, this is incredible. It's just like a slow build to that thing. You get to see the extremities because they're played out through the different vignettes. So as soon as you see the first horseman kill his first victim, or as soon as really you learn Ziyi Zhang's killing of her adopted mother, her reasoning behind that, you can kind of figure out what the rest are doing and why they're doing it and stuff like that. But I've always been a fan of vignette encapsulated film too. Films that have different chapters and stories and subplots that all weave together. So it worked for me. And it was a well written and unique concept that I hadn't seen done in that way before. So I guess that's why it stands out too. So those are both the climaxes. And while Sevens was really in your face like a bomb going off, now I get it. Now I finally understand it. I can still watch this film today and feel the same exact way. It's not like a lot of films, you figure out what happens and then that's it, you're done. This film, it doesn't matter how many times I see it, I'll see more intricacies and more nuances, and I'm just as interested the first time. And every time it is on TV, I watch it. I do. So if I'm bored and there's nothing else on, I'll just put it on Netflix. I'll watch it again because it's just one of those films. And same thing with Horsemen, though. While I won't watch that over and over and over again, because it doesn't have the same cerebral impact that Seven does for me, I was really impressed when it turned out to be his son. I really didn't see that coming. I really didn't. I actually thought that because there's some scenes in Horsemen where he's alone with his son in the car. They're going to pick up the younger son, and he's like, you want to go to the game and stuff like that. And, so you kind of hope that they're going to go from this broken family to this whole one because of the solving of this crime. Like maybe this is the last crime he'll solve, and then he'll pay more attention to his family, and they'll heal and they'll be whole again, because they do touch on a little bit of the hurt that the mother's death caused in those scenes where they're alone and stuff like that. So you carry that hope throughout the film that this one's going to have a happy ending and there's going to be a positive outcome for all of this crime and terribleness that Quaid is determined to solve and eradicate from his world. But, when it doesn't happen like that, and you find out that it's the son that's causing all of this, because Quaid suffers throughout the solving of this crime. He suffers immensely internally, because it just reignites all the pain that he's been avoiding, by avoiding being home. And, when you see the dissolution of hope in his eyes, when he realizes it's his son, and that's it, they're never going to be a whole family again. That's just the end now. It's pretty poignant. It's pretty strong, and I think that's another reason why this film stood out to me. So, but in the ending, those are the climaxes, and one was really in your face, and one was a little more subtle, but no less powerful. So that's how I'll summarize that. The ending of both of the films, Seven ends with Mills being taken in the back of a patrol car to be booked for John Doe's murder. That was the character's name of Kevin Spacey, John Doe. Somerset offers to the captain, played by Arlie Ermey, which was awesome, that whatever Mills needs, he'll provide. So, although Morgan's retiring and stuff like that, and Mills is likely going to, not be a cop ever again, and probably wind up in the nut house or in jail, Somerset's going to stand by him. I think Somerset feels responsible in some way. I can't escape the feeling that he felt responsible for not being able to talk them out of leaving and going back to the Midwest and doing the family thing. That, for whatever reason, you can see he feels responsible. So, but as we watch the car drive Arun Mills off into the distance, Somerset in voiceover says, and I'm paraphrasing here, that he once thought this world was worth fighting for, and then because of all the bad stuff that happened while he was a police officer, he didn't. But now, at the end of the preceding events that we just witnessed in all its brutal and shocking glory, that he believes some of it still is. So, in other words, we're led to believe that sometimes good people do bad things. And not everybody's a throwaway. And that just because people make mistakes, some mistakes are redeemable, as terrible as they are. And while Horseman doesn't end as poetically, Quaid's son ultimately commits suicide while pretending to be one of the victims to lure his detective father to the suicide scene and reveal in all its dramatic glory, what the whole plan was for. He has mutilated himself and strung himself up somehow, which they never explain how he strings himself up, because his other cohorts have all been captured or killed. He was the last of the killers to be caught, and Z's in jail. So I don't know how he did that. They never explain that. He utters his last poignant and ironic words and then expires. So as Quaid looks on in helpless and surreal horror, and we see that dissolution of hope die in his eyes, the light go out, and he realizes, well, that's it, And he's confused and he's trying to process, and then we fade to black and the credits roll. So for me, this choice of ending, it leaves us in the same kind of shocked and despondent headspace as Quaid's character was. I really, though, appreciated that I kept thinking about this film for at least an hour after it was over. So, because that's something that's extremely rare for me too. Usually if a film ends and it doesn't end, nice and neatly wrapped up for me and explanatory, I'm just mad and I don't think about it again. But this was a film that I wanted to explore more of why I didn't understand it, and then I had to think about it and go through it. And it took about an hour after I saw this film to realize, all of these things that I've been discussing here in the show today. And, so if I can do that, see, but that's the thing. I mean, I know most moviegoers go for entertainment. They don't go to be intellectually stimulated or, to philosophize or think about these things in that way. But that's definitely one of the reasons that I go to see film and I make film, because that's pretty much the goal for me, because it is rare. And I think that everything should have a meaning. And if it doesn't, then why do it? And, if you're going to do it right. And these two films definitely do that part right. So, what's the ultimate point of using religion as a plot device? Because both of these films, that was their commonality. That's why I chose them both. And I do study true crime for many, many years. I've always been a true crime buff, and even when I was a kid, I remember any serial killer stories or things like that fascinated me, and not because of the crimes they did or the horrificness or the sadness caused to the victim's family or anything. I wanted to know why somebody normal, born normal, we're all born the same with a blank slate, right, would go to this extreme. What could happen to them that twists their ideology so much to make them think that it was acceptable to do this kind of thing to somebody else in this life? And I never understood it. And so it's always been, I still don't understand it. And I've studied psychology and I've done all this stuff and I've lived a life. And I still don't get how some people make that leap from being hurt and wounded and translating that into anger, though, to actually physically projecting that onto a stranger or even a loved one, but more importantly, a stranger. Like, you just don't know the person, you just grab them off the street and you do horrible things to them and end their life. Where does that come from? I just don't get that. So that's one of the appeals for me for these kind of films, because it helps me to continually think about that. And while I don't think I'll ever come to a resolution or a complete answer to that, it's still one of those unanswered mysteries that draws me every time and that I just can't resist. Like, if you see a Rubik's Cube sitting on the table, you got to play with it. It's the same exact thing. So, as I'm using these episodes, the affinity for the genre mashup, though, in contemporary filmmaking has led to this kind of consistently more than one central and core plot device. It's almost a requirement now. And, for example, the screenplay for Horsemen involves man versus self, and man versus God, even though it's only theologically. Seven does this as well, although that film is more strongly a man versus twisted man plot. The arcs are plain enough that we recognize what's intended to make us, the audience, question our own morality and choices. So the difference between Seven, to me, and Horsemen is that Seven was deliberately laid out. And the sins were the methodologies for the death. Like the model who he mutilates and gives her a